didn't want to turn the camera on too soon because then I end up getting notices from YouTube that I'm infringing copyrights if I'm videoing a video that's already on there. So in any case, so Immanuel Kant attempts to answer the dilemma that David Hume poses, and that is, can we know metaphysics? And metaphysics seems to require our knowing the synthetic a priori, whatever is that, the synthetic a priori. It's really in Kant's Prolegomena that we get the best explanation of that, and that is that the a priori is the prior knowledge that we have going into an experience, and synthetic experience is new experience, something that we've never experienced before. So basically, Hume argues that in order for us to do metaphysics, we have to be able to explain how it is we know what we haven't known yet. So how do we know when we have experience what it is that we learn fresh from that experience, if it seems like we have to know that before we have the experience? There are other examples. We can have a posteriori synthetic information. The a posteriori is what I learned from that experience. So if I see something that I've never seen before, now I know something because I had that experience. I can also have analytic information. Analytic information are like definitions, sort of like all horses are animals, right? And I can learn that from having a synthetic experience. So if I see an animal and someone tells me that's a horse, all horses are animals, is the analytic information that I received from that synthetic a posteriori experience. And now it's analytic information, and it's a posteriori because I've had that synthetic experience. And that goes with me when I go out to have further experiences. So now I know all horses are animals, and then I go out and I see horses in a field, and I know all those are all animals. So now I have a posteriori analytic information I already know before I go and have those kinds of experiences, right? So if we break it into a grid of a posteriori and a posteriori, right? A posteriori, and I have analytic and synthetic types of information in my head, I can have analytic, synthetic, a posteriori information, and I can have a priori analytic information, but I cannot have a priori synthetic information. It's logically impossible. But David Hume argues that's precisely what we need in order for us to have metaphysics. Why would that be? Well, think of it this way. If I'm playing billiards and I'm shooting at an 8-ball, and I've shot this particular shot before, and I know if I shoot it exactly the same way, the exact same result happens. And so I set it up again, and I take the shot, and exactly the same thing happens. So I'm convinced that I know that the relationship between this action on my part and the result is a necessary connection. There's a necessary connection. It will absolutely happen. Well, the question, of course, is how do I know that it's necessary? It turns out that the reason I know it's necessary isn't because of any sort of logical necessity, because I can, as a matter of fact, imagine something else happening, which is kind of amazing. If I can just imagine, for example, the cue ball running into the 8-ball, and just before the 8-ball gets smacked to go into the pocket, the 8 ball jumps up in the air and says, "Ha ha, you can't get me," to the cue ball. And the cue ball looks at it and says, "What? You can't do that," and falls into the pocket, and I scratch. So something totally different has happened. Well, of course, this hasn't actually happened. This is just my imagination. Imagining something absolutely crazy, and that's just not because I'm on drugs or anything that I imagined that. It's actually because I've watched the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and all of a sudden my cue balls just went into a tune, right? So all kinds of crazy things can happen in a tune, etc., right? But the point is that I can imagine something other than what has always happening, which means that the necessity I thought connected the cause and effect are not logically necessary, because something else can happen, and if it's logically necessary, nothing else could happen. But since I can imagine something else happen, it's not logical necessity. So David Hume asks, well, where do we get the sense of necessity? Where do we get the metaphysics that tells us that it must be logically necessary? And David Hume answers that question by pointing out that it's our memory of all those past events where it always happened exactly the same way. But here's the problem. For David Hume, we discover that our memory of past events can be faulty. Basically, I can't trust my memory because sometimes I have false memories of things. So in general, I can't trust my memory. And if that's the case, then I can't trust my memory that because an event has always happened in my experience, that it will always happen in the future, I'm creating a metaphysical explanation for that necessity that I don't have a synthetic, a priori reason for having. I'm guessing, basically, that it will always be the same as it has been before. I'm basing that guess on my memory, but memory lies to me, so I can't trust it. So therefore, it's not logical necessity that gives me the sense that cause and effect have a specific necessary connection. So what kind of necessity am I talking about? Well, it turns out to be simply, as a matter of fact, experience. But that experience lies to me, so therefore I can't trust that sense that there's a logical necessity to cause and effect relationships. And that's going to happen whenever I'm talking about cause and effect. So that essentially means all scientific experiments simply cannot be trusted based on our experience of them. I've done this experiment 5 times, I'm sure it will happen again. Question is, how do you know for sure that it will happen again? Well, guess what? I don't. So David Hume, in a sense, has destroyed the sense of confidence that we have in our scientific experiments. As a result, by the way, science always refers to its hypotheses. These are hypotheses that we have based on our experiments. We don't know for sure. You cannot prove something based on 5 or 6 experiments. It's a hypothesis, which is just another fancy word for a guess. So strictly speaking, science today refers to all of its conclusions as hypotheses or guesses, basically, which gets science in trouble, by the way, especially in Kansas, which, if you remember famously, one of the only things being taught to their children were things that we knew for sure, and science officially can't say that it knows anything for sure, because everything that is a conclusion in science is essentially a hypothesis, with some hypotheses better than others. Right? So notice this actually causes a problem for scientists who want to say that what we're doing is always just an improvement in our best hypotheses so far. That's actually been a boon since David Hume, by the way, because prior to David Hume's and actually Kant's dealing with this problem with David Hume, people were absolutely convinced that they knew all sorts of things, and science had a hard time reevaluating things and coming to newer conclusions because there was kind of a bureaucracy that wouldn't allow it. You're coming to a conclusion that is not officially accepted by the bureaucracy, so you're not allowed to say that. And so science was stymied. It couldn't improve in its overall analyses of things by new experiments because the new conclusions were not allowed to even be considered. But once David Hume's problem was evaluated by Kant, and Kant spread the word, it ended up being accepted as kind of a rebellion in science, that all the things we thought we knew had to be reevaluated, and as a result, science was able to blossom and improve. Notice David Hume was a contemporary of Adam Smith, and Adam Smith and David Hume are contemporaries of some of the new scientists. So the kinds of scientific revolutions that go on in England at the time, the new steam engines, the new kinds of processes, factories, things of that sort, are all coincidental with this kind of philosophical, psychological reevaluation of science. By the way, I can't say that David Hume caused that explosion. It might very well have been that he's just coming to explain why that explosion in science was allowed to happen. Can't of course conclude what caused what, thanks to David Hume as well. But so it's an odd situation to look at how all of this influenced practical, everyday scientific behavior, but it does. So, does Kant answer David Hume? When you get right down to the question, Immanuel Kant concludes that David Hume really didn't, he just touched the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. There's lots more associated with this same problem that David Hume uses that also has to be answered. And so Kant is not just trying to answer David Hume, he's answering the problem that was dug up by David Hume. And so he's trying to figure out what is the grounds for our metaphysics. But in a way, this is why you can't take Aristotle and Plato into a laboratory and test them to see which one of their metaphysical theories is true. You can't use vials of various things and mix them and say, aha, Plato was right, Aristotle was wrong, because the kinds of hypotheses that they're making in their metaphysics are based on untestable grounds for how we know things. Remember, Plato's idea is that ideas exist in an abstract, ideal world where all the ideas are, and our minds being connected with those enable us to know things. Well, you can't test any of that in the laboratory. Aristotle's answer, on the other hand, seems a little bit more commonsensical, where he argues that all of our knowledge comes from our experience of physical things, and then we give nouns, we set names for things, and then we come to understand what things belong to, what categories of things, the nouns that we describe as chairs and tables and so on, etc. And that's how we know things. Well, we can't test that either, because it seems like Plato could be right. Where do we get the name tables? Who invents that? The last place we have where anyone explains where a name came from was in Genesis, where Adam names everything. And that, of course, is not a very explanatory sort of reason for why we have the names we do. Remember, they also have to come up with the Tower of Babel story in order to explain why there are multiple languages. And that doesn't really explain why there are multiple languages as far as we're concerned today. Right? Okay, so Kant's in a situation where he's trying to answer Jung and explain how we can have metaphysics. And this is where Kant famously completely switches the way our models work. And instead of saying that we're actually able to know what's out there, either as Plato says or as Aristotle says, he instead argues that the reason we experience things is not because of the way things are out there, but is instead a result of the way we are in here. So, human being has certain characteristics, and in experiencing the world as a human being, I end up framing my experience in a particularly human sort of framework that enables me to experience things as a human being. So, for example, everything I experience as happening in time. Now, I don't know if plants experience time. I don't know if animals, besides human beings, experience things in time. Of course, I would think that animals at least do. Remember, what's it like to be a bat? I would think bats feel like there's time, but I can't really say that, of course, because they're not human. But I know lots of humans, and it seems to me that all humans experience things in time. So it does seem like there's something about being a human being that makes me feel like time is passing. And I experience time passing no matter what I'm doing. So, for example, even if I'm sound asleep, I feel like time has passed. I might not know how much, but at the same time, I might wake up and feel like, well, it's certainly later in the evening than it was when I first lay down. I don't experience time going the other way. I can, of course, imagine time going in different ways, and a great example of that is Alan Lightman's book, Einstein's Dreams, which if you ever want to totally blow your mind, I recommend reading Einstein's Dreams, because it's chapter after chapter where time proceeds totally differently than what we normally think of as the way time goes. In some chapters, time goes backwards. In other chapters, time goes almost geometrically. It goes backwards, forwards. It's totally unpredictable. It depends on the chapter you're in. It's very strange. So we can imagine time going differently. And by the way, it does seem that time proceeds at different speeds. Sometimes you feel like time is rushing by us. Other times you feel like time is just crawling along. My wife, for example, just the other day said, time seems to be going so fast right now. It's already the second week of April. And yet, when we're in the middle of the darkest days of winter, it seems like time is just crawling. I said to her, well, it seems like that's even the way the Earth is going, because when we're towards winter solstice, the Earth is traveling slower than when it's traveling in summer, because the arc of the orbit is different. Is that true? Anyone know? I don't know if you're into physics. It's just like, wow, you get the idea. I don't know. Does that actually have an impact on the way we feel about time? I don't know. In any case, time does seem to change depending on our mood and so on. But in any case, we all experience time. Everything that happens to us happens as time elapsing. So that seems to be a requirement for Kant. And so he says, one of the categories that we can know for sure that must exist for us, not necessarily for reality, it has to be focused on our experience, right, is the idea that time is passing. The second thing, he says, that everyone has to experience is space. But not space for everything. So, for example, abstract concepts like Plato's ideas, for example, triangularity, right? Triangularity doesn't have to actually exist in any particular place. Triangles do. I have to have a specific triangle sitting on the wall, on the blackboard, in the Christmas tree, or wherever I'm looking at the triangle, right? Then it has to have dimensions. It can't be just one dimension. It can't be two dimensions. It has to be three-dimensional in order for it to exist. Even if it's a two-dimensional diagram on a board, if you look close enough, you know that ink or whatever has made that triangle shape on the board has actual depth, right? So it's definitely actually three-dimensional. Which, by the way, if you're a fan of Flatland, anybody familiar with Flatland? One person? Funny book, interesting book. Rather famous, actually. I guess, especially if you're in the math. But the idea is all the characters are two-dimensional, basically lines, shapes that are interacting with one another. And by the way, the plot is that these two-dimensional characters come across something that is three-dimensional, which of course is totally beyond their experience. Whoa, etc. Right? You just have to follow the book to see how this works. That teaches them, by the way, that there are other dimensions out there that they're unaware of, which coincidentally ties into Brian Greene's presentation that we just showed, right? That there's perhaps other dimensions out there that you can't actually see. So almost the same kind of plot. Interesting. Although, strictly speaking, Flatland is totally based on a false generalization, and that is that you can have two-dimensional characters, because of course even a line on a chalkboard is three-dimensional, actually. And so I've always thought, well, that's wrong. You can't have a two-dimensional character when all of our experience of space is three-dimensional. And by the way, we could always throw in time as another dimension. So, space is an absolute requirement for anything besides an abstract concept, says Kant. So that's another category that human beings experience. Everything has to be three-dimensional. Except for abstract ideas which have no dimension, because they don't actually appear in any particular place. But if something appears in a place, it's three-dimensional. Besides that, then, we also have other categories by which we frame all of our experience. So, for example, in our understanding, hopefully, we've got a good page for that. Of course, the whole concept of category comes from Aristotle, from his system of category. So, categorical thinking. That's what we're doing. And by the way, that could very well be a matter of Western languages that do that. I don't know. I mean, that's a contemporary problem for us when we start thinking about how different languages frame things for the people that are thinking in that language. It seems like different languages might very well have a different way of arranging things in people's minds. But so when we were looking at Kant, and we have categories, Kant says that everything we experience in number as quantity. So there's one, or there's a lot, or there's all of them. So unity, plurality, totality, for example. There's also quality. By quality, this of course goes back to, so notice these are Aristotelian categories, somewhat. I mean, there's a little bit of a difference. Aristotle had 10, including substance and time, but Kant gives us 12. A little bit more creative, I suppose. But so quality, in that sense, is the same kind of thing that Aristotle gives us. And remember, for Aristotle, quality meant positive or negative, affirmative or negative. And for Kant, that would mean that things are real, in which case it's affirmative, or it's negated, or it's negative. But in any case, things have limitation. They're not eternal or infinite. They have a shape, they have a limit, and so on. So these are, unlike Aristotle's sense that these qualities are characteristics of the things in reality, the things themselves, Kant is framing all of these as the way our human minds frame things. In other words, as far as we're concerned, it's not necessarily true of the things that we're experiencing. We don't even get into that question. We have to just keep in mind that the reason things appear the way they do to human beings is because we're human beings. And we have a couple of senses, eyes, ears, etc., that perceive things the way they do, and that's what frames things for us. So that and by the way, this is common sense today. I know if I'm looking at the wall and I see the wall is a certain color, the reason it appears that color is because that's the way it appears to me, not because that's the way the wall is actually colored in reality. That doesn't make sense to talk about. It's always a matter of how does it look to the perceiver, right? And by the way, if I'm colorblind, I'm going to see things differently. If I'm a snake, I'll see things differently. I'll see things by heat, right? Bats don't see the wall, right? All that sort of thing. They have echolocation that tells them there's a barrier there, but I'm sure when they're sitting there in the evening or prior to their going out into the world for the night, they're not having a conversation and saying, remember, fly to the white wall and then hang erect. They don't talk that way because they don't have colors. They must use some other concept instead. We also, as human beings, have things related to other things, and the kinds of relationships are inherence. Some things belong to something. A sweater has a particular feel to it. I couldn't imagine having a sweater that didn't feel like some sort of material. It has to have some kind of inherent characteristic of the way it feels, the way it looks, the way it smells, and so on. The way it gets pulled when my St. Bernard claws me with her huge little paws that she thinks are loving little taps, but of course knock people over because she's a 150-pound St. Bernard puppy, which, to some extent, that ought to be illegal to have a puppy that weighs that much, because they act like puppies, but a 150-pound puppy can destroy everything. So relations, they're inherent substance, and by accident it means things like the texture, the feel, the color, etc. It's not like an accident, like a car accident, but it's the way it's appreciated, the accidental characteristics. Causality and dependence. There's that issue that David Hume was talking about. So the reason that billiard ball is going to knock that 8-ball into the pocket when I shoot it the way I do is because that's the way I will perceive it. That's the way a human mind perceives those kinds of events. I can imagine all sorts of weird things happening, but there's a reason that I can do that. It's because I'm free to imagine all sorts of other things happening. But what I might say is the actual causal relationship is not something that's free for me. Now, of course, does that really answer that question? Can I really trust my expectations? No. Because I don't really have an answer for that. I don't really have an answer for how I cannot guarantee that things will happen the way they have before. David Hume has succeeded in destroying that sense of certitude. Community, reciprocity, and we also think of things in modes. Is it possible? Does something exist? Is it necessary? We do think of things in these modes. Now you might think, okay, so in this sense, Immanuel Kant has succeeded in answering David Hume's dilemma for us. Of course, the problem was immediately the next generation questioned the whole process that Kant used to apply this, and pointed out that, for one thing, these categories are not the only kinds of categories that human beings use. He was fascinated with Aristotle's categories and basically just incorporated Aristotle into his answer. But as a matter of fact, the direction all of this goes in the next generation, Gottlob Herder, for example, is another example. I don't know why I always remember Gottfried, sorry. But Johann Gottfried von Herder is another philosopher of this generation, slightly after Kant, a contemporary of Fichte and Hegel and Schelling. And what they're going to argue is that the categories are actually our languages that frame things. So the reason that we can perceive things come not from a specific set of categories that trace themselves back to Aristotle, but instead characteristics that are associated with our language. Very interesting question. When the Greeks write the Iliad, Homer writing the Iliad and the Odyssey, it seems that he only uses 3 main colors in all of his writings. So there's yellow, there's red, and there's black, white, and red, and occasional use of yellow. So the question that was asked around the early 19th century was, did the Greeks only see those colors? Have we evolved? And by the way, the reason the question came up was, of course, because they were talking about evolution now. They had Lyle talking about the evolution of the Earth, that we have different types of rocks and so on. Of course, eventually they would have Darwin talking about biological evolution. They had Herbert Spencer talking about social evolution. But they also started asking, did our sense of color evolve? So that if we look at the Greek literature and they only have these 4 colors or 3 colors, did they only see those colors? Did they not know blue, for example? For the Greeks in the Iliad, they talk about the sky being black, for example. But obviously the sky is blue, at least during the day. And the sea, by the way, is blue. Homer famously refers to the wine-dark sea. Well, the ocean doesn't look like wine, red wine. So the question was, has our eyesight evolved? Well, today, of course, we wouldn't say that that's the case, because that would take a lot longer for evolution to change the way our eyes work. But instead, the argument is that the language evolved, that the Greeks didn't have other language words for colors. And by the way, we could look at contemporary languages and discover that the word for colors is different from one language to another. And we can test and discover that individuals from one language can see certain colors quicker than someone from another language can see those same colors. So it does make a significant difference what language you speak, what sort of colors your language enables you to perceive, and how fast and how accurately you recognize them. That's kind of amazing. So a lot of what Kant is doing, of course, is explored as a language problem. And that's why, of course, I even bring it up so frequently, because we have all these questions today about how languages affect the way we perceive the world and the way we think. Right? Even, I remember in teaching logic, one of my students one year spoke a language that in trying to figure out what was going on, I realized that they didn't have the verb to be. The word is, right? So that when we have these statements that Aristotle arranges for us, the A statement, the E statement, the I statement, the O statement. So all horses are animals. What are you saying in that? You're saying this category is in this category, right? So you've got 2 categories, 2 nouns, horses, animals. You're saying these are in these, right? So this set is in this set. So you, of course, could use a Venn diagram today to show that relationship, right? On the other hand, an E statement says none of these are in this set, right? So no dogs or cats, right? So these and these are mutually excluded from one another, right? But that's still using the concept of is. These are not is these, right? So you've got is as an essential ingredient in all 4 of those categorical statements. And knowledge, as far as this whole Greek tradition, is why we refer to ourselves in a sense as going Greek in colleges and so on, because it's traced back to the Greek original. But when we think in terms of what we know these statements are true or false. And those statements are based on a particular grammatical arrangement. Well, if you're speaking a language that doesn't enable you to have that grammatical arrangement, can you know anything? Seems like we have no answer for that. Because if we say you have to know animals and horses have a certain relationship, horses are animals, but by the way, it's not the case that all animals are horses. And that was the problem he had. When I would say all horses are animals, that's true. All animals are horses, that's false. he didn't understand the difference. As far as he was concerned, each time I would say horses, animals, animals, horses. I just had animals and horses. He could not see a difference. Was there something wrong with him? I concluded no. Instead, it was something to do with the language he was using in order to think about what we were talking about. He was translating things from English into his language, and his language didn't have the grammatical ability to essentially frame things categorically. And by the way, there's more languages in the world that are that way than there are in the traditional Western way. Would that make a difference? Would that explain why science blossomed in the West and not necessarily in other parts of the world where the language was not amenable to doing that sort of thing? That's a certain possibility, right? So, of course, when we're talking about the categories that Kant presumed were part of the human approach to experience, the way we frame things, he thought he could categorize them using those ancient Greek categories, but today we don't think in that limited sense. We instead argue that our language is what enables us to have whatever metaphysics we have. So in a sense, Kant didn't answer Jung, he just started us on the way to answering Jung. Is this all fun? I found it exciting when I was in college, when I was learning this stuff. I was exuberant with all of this interesting information. But then that was me, I suppose. Okay. So we do need an interesting quiz question. Do you think that the reason women's equality has been so successful in English-speaking countries is because of the nature of how English treats sex? I'll explain it if that will help. So, say if I'm French, everything in my language, and so everything in my experience, is either masculine or feminine. For example, Pierre Bourdieu, in his book,
The way you spell it is masculine, feminine.
the way you spell it is dependent on whether it's masculine or feminine.
Yep.
In French, if you're masculine, you can be heureux, happy. But if you're feminine, you have to be heureuse. You can't, so a male and a female can't be happy the same way. But, so Pierre Bourdieu in his book, Pierre Bourdieu, by the way, is dead, but not too long ago dead. So that's kind of, I should have actually had him on the list. But masculine domination, he's a sociologist, and got in trouble with his own countrymen over this book. And by the way, if you read the book in English, it's kind of weird because he's talking about the masculine nature of things like trees and tables and so on. But of course, in English, there's that interesting difference that all of those things are neuter. So we don't sex things in our language the way the French do. In French, everything is either masculine or feminine. There is no neuter. And oddly, that means that French people even associate specific nouns, whether they're masculine or feminine, associate those nouns with feminine characteristics or masculine characteristics. Whereas, of course, in English, a tree is an it. We don't think of a tree as either masculine or feminine. Or tables is especially feminine, or chairs is especially masculine, right? We don't have specific kinds of characteristics. Death, for example, is a different male or female, depending on your language. In English, death can be a neuter thing. We don't necessarily think of death as a man. We have the image of the ugly-looking kind of cloaked, scythe-carrying individual, which we would normally think of as male, but in French, death is female, etc. Right? So if you think, of the masculine or feminine characteristics of words, the way the language treats it is certainly going to have quite an impact. But so the interesting thing to me is notice that English seems to be very unique in the way all nouns are neuter. We don't think of chairs as male or female. Ships, occasionally we think of as females, right? Maybe some other machines we think that way. But for the most part, everything in English, unless it's actually a person or maybe a female dog, we might say she, right? But get your dog off my lawn, it did such and such last time. We could say that in English. But le chien is always masculine in French, which is very confusing, because what if it's a female dog? Well, I'll leave it there. Is this fun? You guys having fun? We're almost done. We're down, we finish in April, so we're getting close. I hope you're being significantly transformed by your philosophical experience. Have a good day. Any questions for me?